Welcome to the first episode of Please Call Me Crazy. I'm very happy for all of those out there who have found their way to the channel and to this podcast. To say that I'm excited is an understatement, a gross understatement. I'm very happy after much anticipation and hard work to get this entire thing prepared, to be, finally launching and premiering my own podcast. It's been a long time coming. I've done countless appearances on other people's podcasts, television, features, and number of articles and different things like that. But never had a place to call my own. Never had my own home where I could come consistently and really control the scope of the conversation, the topics, and everything of that sort. So I'm very excited. Please like and subscribe to this channel. And continue to support. I know there are many people out there who have supported me for a long time and continue to, and we get consistent requests for me to start my own podcast and to be able to talk to people on a daily basis or weekly basis or a more frequent basis. And this is me attempting to do that. So please hit the like button and subscribe, and feel free to drop any comments below as we build this thing on the fly. We're still in our infancy, so we're going to be working out kinks and glitches and all of those things as we go here. The time is too dire for us to wait for things to be perfect in order to talk about the things that we're going to talk about on this show. Bit of housekeeping. First and foremost, I don't want anybody to get confused and think that I'm leaving the Fearless team, because I'm not. Actually, Jason and I talked the other day, and I requested that I be able to appear on Fearless even more after he gave me some great mentorship and critique about my overall broadcast game, let's say, to use an athlete term, my game in broadcasting. And we had a great long conversation, and he and I have many great long conversations. And, quite frankly, I think the conversation that's happening over at Fearless, the conversation and the leadership that Jason is bringing, is one of the most authentic and genuine conversations that you can find anywhere today, especially on the internet or on YouTube. So go and like and subscribe to his channel, Jason Whitlock, Fearless with Jason Whitlock, if you haven't already, which I'm sure many of you have, because, uncomparable what Jason is doing. This isn't me exiting the show. I'm going to continue to be on the show. I hope to be on the show even more. I'm trying to provide support. And I think one of the ideas that I'm going to come back to as the show goes on is the alternative economy, because, I'm not just here to talk and entertain. I also want to be a source of directive and action and things that we can do to impact our daily lives and fight back against this machine that has now casted a big dark shadow over all of us. And the alternative economy is one of them. It's probably the most essential. And in the alternative economy, we have to build institutions and organizations, companies, communities that are like-minded and that share common beliefs, that resist what has begun or what has grown from this machine. And this is just a part of it. So I say that to reiterate that, my time in Fearless is only going to increase, and Fearless is only going to grow. But what I'm doing is trying to, provide cover fire, you could say, and add to the conversation so that people out there like you who enjoy content like this always have a treasure chest or a trove or, an infinite amount of content that you can immerse yourself in to hear perspectives like ours. With that being said, there's a reason why this podcast is airing at 9 p.m. Central, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that's a bit of housekeeping that I forgot. But the format of this show is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll be doing Please Call Me Crazy. We intentionally scheduled for the show to premiere at 9 p.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because Jason and the team over at Fearless usually go from about 6 to 8:30 every day during the week. And in the future, and we'll keep you updated on when this time comes, I'll be doing the Royce White Show, which is more of a produced type of show with a number of different elements on Saturday nights at prime time. So we'll keep you informed and updated on that as well. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays at some time in the near future, the professor and I, Professor Penn, will be doing a two-man podcast called Hebrews. And if you haven't, please, Professor Penn has also premiered and launched his podcast today. If you get the chance, go like and subscribe to his channel. He and I are good friends and comrades. I consider him family, and he and I have these conversations about a number of issues, a variety of issues, whether it be politics, culture, or just our personal lives on a daily basis. And I hear that his first podcast was very entertaining and deep and educational, which reflects how our conversations are as well. So there's that housekeeping. And also stay tuned on Sundays, not now, but in the future at some point, the White House podcast will be launching as well. So we're trying to give you as much content as possible. I made a commitment this year that I would, make myself available and give as much time as I could to help push these ideas out there into the world and get them to you, the audience, and let you do what you will with them. Debate, disagree, agree, comment, and start to form a new direction. I think young people have to really take the reins and start to form a new direction for this country, for the world, for society. So here we are. Now that housekeeping is out of the way, let's get into it. Episode 1, Please Call Me Crazy. Why am I doing this? I thought this was the most appropriate place to start for episode 1 is why am I even doing this? Many of you will be a little familiar with my story, but some of you won't. And as we grow, more people probably won't have a good understanding of who I am. We live in an age of the internet where people pop up out of nowhere. I don't want to be one of those people for you, although I don't necessarily mind it. If I can, I would like to be somebody who you know well, who you come to trust because you know well, and understand why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing and where I came from. And I guess the way that I was thinking about it this morning is, this is a response. This podcast, my work as a political activist, some would say, is a response to the establishment that has grown to be out of control, grown to be too big, grown to be corrupt, and grown to have a real stronghold on society, but the lives of everyone and everything. And so, this response, this work that I'm doing, this message that I'm trying to bring, comes from me being blackballed, you could say, or subverted, silenced, intentionally silenced by one of the biggest and most influential corporations in America, or in the world for that matter, really. And that's the NBA. And it's not just the NBA. It's the entire corporate community that is connected to the NBA, who has a vested interest in entertainment, who has a vested interest in content and media, and this new idea of social connectivity and social networking. This is the institution that I came from. This is the institution where that introduced me to the public square, and in that history, I tried to put up a real genuine fight against the norm and the status quo in that institution regarding mental health. And I know mental health has been hijacked now, and it's being used as a battering ram to justify a number of pervasive political ideologies. And we'll talk more about that momentarily. But this fight that I brought was genuinely about mental health, and it's for that reason that the establishment, the NBA, and all of their other corporate partners uh, did their best to make sure that most people who will now be watching the show and tune into this podcast and be growing with this audience, they made sure that you never really knew who I was or the details of my story or the details of my fight. Many people will Google my name right now, and my Wikipedia will pop up, and right on cue, and the story, the brief synopsis that they give in the first paragraph or so of my Wikipedia will tell you exactly what the mainstream media wants you to think. I'm a young man who suffered from debilitating anxiety, crippling anxiety, and that crippling anxiety or that debilitating anxiety manifested itself in a fear of flying, and that fear of flying is exactly why I never became the NBA player that I could have. And some would say that I'm an NBA bust. I think that was Bleacher Report that said that. Maybe Yahoo Sports. I'm not quite sure. One of those two authoritative sources. But all of that couldn't be further from the truth. The truth is that I was diagnosed with anxiety at 16 years old, and I found a way to manage my anxiety through my teenage and high school years and into my college years well enough to be one of the most successful athletes of my class or my generation statistically in college. In all of college basketball, I was the only player to lead my team in all five major statistical categories, which, if you're unfamiliar, are points, rebounds, assists, blocks, and steals. I led my team in all five of those, which is a really rare feat, and it's something to be uh, proud of, I guess, and I guess I am, but I really only bring it up in this context to try and provide an understanding of just how efficient I was as a basketball player across the board from an analytical standpoint, which has become the vanguard of the way the modern game approaches evaluating players is, analytics, statistics, and all of these different metrics to get a firmer grasp on how to measure a player, which I don't necessarily agree with. I want to be forthright. I'm not of this analytics wave like most of the modern NBA is. But I bring it up to show that in the way that the game has gone and in the way they want the game to be, I actually excelled considerably, if not the most of anybody in my class at the time and of that skill set. So I was able to navigate having anxiety and struggling with anxiety up until that point. And by the time I had gotten to the NBA, or I was drafted into the NBA, I became very skeptical of the corporations, of corporations like the NBA, but corporations in the broadest sense. And when you go from being a young child and then to a teenager and then a young man, and you experience basketball or sports or athletics in a more grassroots community context, for anybody who isn't completely overtaken by the money, completely overtaken by all of the superficial things that come with professional sports, getting drafted into a professional league, it's a stark contrast. I mean, if you're really tuned in and you understand, the world around you, if you're paying attention, the contrast is stark. And so I'll give you this brief story since we're on board, and anybody who may not know, my anxiety became a very big talking point of the NBA draft in 2013. And this was the draft that also had other players, star players. Anthony Davis went number one. Damian Lillard was in my draft class. Draymond Green was in my draft class. The list goes on and on. And so, with all of those very, very talented and skilled players, who the league and the entire basketball world had a lot of excitement about, my story was still one of the most interesting stories in the draft. And the reason was because as far as the NBA went, a conversation about mental health specifically hadn't yet happened, especially not in the public square, especially not with these institutions who cover sports. You know, all of the institutions around, whether it be ESPN, Sports Illustrated, you pick one. They hadn't really delved into this topic or had to confront this topic when it came to a player. Now, sometimes a player would find himself in trouble, whether maybe that was with drugs or alcohol or something of that nature, and mental health would loosely come up in those situations. Mine was much different. Mine was, I'm a guy who didn't drink, didn't smoke, never had any issues with drugs or alcohol, never really had any serious legal issues that had anything to do with drugs or alcohol. I was just a kid who, came from played at Iowa State and had been open and public about my struggles with anxiety as a younger man, and people took to that. People were interested in it. Why? Because mental health as a topic in general outside of sports was already on the rise. And so, here I am, going into the draft, and this story about mental health is bubbling up. Where will this player with this hyper versatile skill set land, given this question mark about anxiety, and how does the NBA view this, and how do organizations view mental health or anxiety? Do they consider it a genuine health issue that many people are increasingly struggling with in our society, or do they view it more as a character issue and something to be thought of along the lines of a kid who's had legal trouble or other varieties of questionable background, red flags? And so, that was the story that was built around my draft stock, is what they call it, what your stock is in the draft. But that wasn't what I was living through. What I was living through, away from the questions of the media and the headlines and the message boards and all of those things, I was living through the actual draft process. And in that draft process, a couple things happen for everyone. You go fly around to each organization who may have an interest in drafting you, and you work out for that organization, which is standard. But also a part of that is an interview process. And in that interview process, they will ask you all sorts of things about any number of topics. It could be your life, where you grew up, your love for the game, how you approach working out, and training, whatever the case may be. Well, I came with high marks from a coach who had formerly been a GM in the NBA, Fred Hoiberg. He was my coach at Iowa State. And Fred played for 10 years in the NBA as well. So I came with high praise from Fred and great reports on all things that most NBA franchises would look for. And they weren't lies. He wasn't saying it just because he was my coach. It really was the case that I was a workaholic, that they had to lock me out of the weight room because I'm just relentless. I'm relentless when it comes to to preparing and being ready. So I was a guy who was doing 1,000 push-ups at home in my campus apartment every night, maybe more than 1,000 push-ups a day throughout the course of a day to prepare. And that was part of the reason why when it came time to play against some of the best in the country, or who the media said were the best in the country, I always seemed to be physically dominant, to say the least. And being physically dominant allowed me to expand my game and focus on every little facet of the game, which is why I was able to excel in every statistical category. So I came with those high marks. Now, I was a guy who was always at practice. I was at practice early. I'd leave late. I put extra work in that regard as well. And when it came to just being coachable, Fred and I spent a number of hours or days, whether it be in person or on the phone, just discussing the team and the strategy and what we thought would work best, what I needed to do things I needed to change in my game to help the team excel. And I was unselfish to a default. And all of these, and I only say these things to set the framework for the the report or the rap on me coming into the draft process. And I say, because look, from a basketball philosophy standpoint, I don't care who you are. I don't care where you are. I don't care where you lace them up, what court it is. The players who are unselfish, who are going to do what it takes for the team to win, are players that you want to have. Unselfishness, genuine unselfishness, is a trait that's hard to teach. It can be taught, but it's very hard to teach, and it's very hard. It's very rare that a player comes with such a complete skill set who is genuinely unselfish. And I was that. I still am that today. I remember playing at Iowa State one game against Oklahoma. We were at Oklahoma where I flew, which counteracts the narrative that was built around me that I can't fly, and that's why I'm not playing in the NBA today. It's completely untrue. But there was a time we were playing at Oklahoma, and I remember, I had basically become the designated point guard, and I didn't take a shot the entire game. The first shot I took in the entire game was a dunk. It was a game-winning dunk to put us ahead in the final minute and a half of the game. And I remember walking off the court, and a writer asked me, why I hadn't taken a shot, and I said to him, I said, why would I need to? I thought my teammates had better shots at the time. And we won the game, and I had 12, 13, 14 assists, probably 11, 12 rebounds, but I only had 2 points, and I was really okay with that. That nothing about that bothered me. And a lot of guys get caught up in how many points they score, and they forget to do what's necessary to win the game. And I think even at the highest level today, a lot of players struggle with that. Although I will say that the NBA is getting far better culturally with players moving the ball. I think Golden State helped a lot with that. I think the influx of the European and international scene helped a lot with that. So, the 3-point analytics helped a lot with that. So guys are actually moving the ball now more than they ever have, and that's a joy to see, especially for me as a player who really believes in that style of play. But again, I say all of that to set the frame for how I came into the draft process. I had a coach who had many personal relationships in the NBA, had been a GM, had been a player himself, and this was the rap on me. So as I'm going around to these pre-draft workouts and interviews, I'm not getting any questions about those kinds of things. All of the questions for me are about anxiety. I'd go into these back rooms with GM, coach, scout, this selected panel of people. Most of the time, you didn't really, never knew them. I remember when I was in Miami, Tim Hardaway was in the room, and I was kind of like starstruck because Tim Hardaway is an OG. Some of you might not even know who Tim Hardaway is nowadays. It wouldn't surprise me, but Tim Hardaway is definitely an icon and a legend in the game, somebody who I grew up watching in the 90s. And so I'm in this draft process, and you go from being a young boy and a college athlete and a kid, to being an adult and being in a room with people that you revere, and it's kind of, shocking sometimes, right? Jarring. And so I'm sitting here with Tim Hardaway, and he's sitting there, and he's, fielding a few questions, and I'm like, man, the UTEP two-step. If you're a real basketball head, you know what the UTEP two-step is. And my coach in high school who trained me in my individual skill work used to have us do the UTEP two-step in our ball handling. So to be sitting here with Tim Hardaway, I'm kind of distracted. Like, as a basketball fan, he's asking me these questions. I'm thinking about the UTEP two-step and like, I wonder, can he still do that? But this was the process for me, and many of them in this interview had these extensive questions about anxiety. And it started to be a concern, because on on one side, I was willing to talk about anxiety. I mean, I talked about it in Sports Illustrated, ESPN. I was very open about it, so it wasn't talking about it that bothered me. But it was the combination of what the media was saying they were hearing because they have their inside sources, right? And then what I was hearing and the tone and trying to gauge as a person who's basically interviewing for a job, what do they want to hear from me? I mean, what exactly should I be trying to convey? Because to say that I, that there wasn't that I wasn't being evaluated in these conversations is ridiculous. Of course I was, and I should be. But I became concerned because, it was hard for me to know whether or not the questions around mental health were out of a genuine lack of knowledge, or were they a test, right? Were they testing me to see what my answers would be around these issues? So I went through it as best as I could and gave them all the information I had. But again, I'm 21 years old just turned 21 at the time, and I had just been diagnosed at 16. So I only knew enough about mental health to navigate dealing with anxiety disorder and whatever little bit of knowledge and things like that I had come across in my own journey and an attempt to thwart my anxieties. But it started to seem like these questions had more gravity than I was prepared to inform or influence them around. And I had that concern. And then, so I get drafted. And mind you, I get drafted 16th overall, and I'm very grateful for that. I mean, most people in the history of human beings don't get drafted into the NBA. That's just the reality. So I'm very grateful, and blessed that I even got drafted. It was really my belief at times that I wouldn't be drafted into the NBA because of this very mental health, this mental health conversation. And so I get drafted 16th, but the consensus is that 16 is actually a drop for me in this draft, that I actually had a top 5 skill set, or a top 5 what they would call NBA readiness, meaning that you can step right in as a rookie or in your beginning years and help a franchise win, contribute. And again, that goes back to me being NBA ready, my body, my work ethic, my skill set, my approach to the game. These things all boded well for me to actually step in and help an organization right away. So I was considered to have a top 5 skill set, but I dropped to 16. Many people agreed that it was because of these question marks around anxiety. Okay, so that was the first sort of, I want to say, red flag. And so then, and I'll tell this quick story, and that'll basically bring us to the end of my beginning NBA journey. There is a program, seminar that all the NBA rookies go to called the Rookie Transition Program, and this is a 3 or 4 day event that they have in Hoboken, Jersey. At least that's where they were having it when I went. I'm not sure where they have it now. But they have this event, and basically what it's intended to do is bring together the NBA, the office, the NBA office, the NBA side of things, the NBA Players Association side of things, former players, former league officials, and other people from the NBA community to help rookies get a better perspective on things that they should know, right? Things, guidance from people who have been through it, who have seen that transition happen before. And it was a great camp. We got split up into teams and or groups, and I actually was the MVP of my group at the Rookie Transition Program. And I mean, that was just a little award that was given to people who were attentive and asked questions and engaged in dialogue in a meaningful way and all these things like that. So I was the MVP with my little group. And we met all kinds of people. We had all kinds of people speak, whether it be about financial troubles that they had. It could have been, situations with women, that went wrong, or being on a team, accepting your role, growing at the right rate, not wanting too much too soon, or just the ebbs and flows from a basketball standpoint. So we saw a lot of that. We talked about legal issues like attorneys and agents and people who want to scam you out of money, and all these other power of attorney seminars and things like that. So we were getting a rundown, the basics of becoming a man, but becoming a man, a grown adult in the NBA context, because all of us go from that transition of being 20 years old, being in college, still living at home with mom, and then you get your own place, your own job. Now you got to pay your own bills. You got your own legal issues, attorneys, and things like that you now have to deal with on your own. When you go into the NBA, it's an entirely different world. There's completely different considerations, threats, dangers, as well as good things that come with that, is obviously like money. That's one, uh, which helps a lot, but it also can be a big problem, and it usually is for a lot of people, and we don't really hear about how problematic getting that amount of money at 21 years old can be, but it is a big problem, which is part of the reason why they have this seminar. So the seminar was great by and large. Like I don't have any complaints or bad memories about the seminar. In fact, I enjoyed it a lot, and it was game changing for me just to be able to meet some of the people who I grew up watching and get to know them on a personal level like that. It felt like a blessing. It felt like a huge honor and privilege. Again, coming from a mindset where there were times in this draft process where I didn't even think I was going to be drafted. So now every time I'm actually in this community around these other great players in my generation, but the older guys and retired players as well, I'm like thankful. I'm like, man, I'm glad I made it through the bottleneck there. And then there was this one part of the seminar where we heard a man speak who you may not know, but you should definitely go and look up and become familiar with his story. It'll help you understand how his story moved me. His name is Chris Herron, and Chris Herron was was a really good basketball player. I'm told that I throw the word "great" out too loosely, but I'm very respectful, and I'm very respectful and optimistic, you could say, about people's skills in all the different forms they come in. So I think Chris Herron was a great player. Look, if you play at the level he did and you make it to the NBA and you're able to play with some of the circumstances he played under, you're a great basketball player, to say the least. So anyway, I'm listening to his story. He comes up, he's speaking, and his is about drug addiction, right? Like that's Chris Herron's story, is about being addicted to very hard narcotics. And he told some gripping stories about being in the NBA, about being overseas, on drugs, about places he found himself in, where he can look back now that he was clean, and really just be thankful to God that he survived. And in this story where he talked about drug addiction and drug abuse and all of the darkness that came with that, and the blessing of him coming through, he spoke about the emotion that he was dealing with, or the psychological part that he was dealing with in it. And when he spoke about his mindset, or his memories of these times, or his emotions that he was going through, it resonated with me because I understood it. I had lived through some of those similar things, and it didn't come from drug abuse, but anxieties and depressions don't always come from drug abuse. They can, but a person like me who had general anxiety, I struggled with some of those fears and anxieties, which was not tied to drugs, but it still resonated with me, and I connected with that part of his story. And again, it really moved me. And if you get a chance, you should go hear Chris Herron speak. If you can find him on the internet, on YouTube, or if you get the chance to actually sit through one of his seminars, you should do that. Read his book. I'm sure he has a book out there. I've never read it, but I'm sure he has one. But you should do that. It's a gripping story, and he does a great job of telling it, and he's as real as they come. and he's very unabashed about what he went through and how it all transpired. So I'm sitting in the crowd as a 21-year-old kid at this transition program, and the keynote speaker, the most compelling story, resonates with me, and it makes me ask myself these questions about mental health, my own anxiety, as it pertains and relates to the NBA, and then the drug policy, right, in the NBA. And the reason why I asked and what made me think about it is um, I was prescribed anti-anxiety medication. And I had been prescribed that since I was 16, since I was first diagnosed with anxiety. One being Prozac, years to, which took me years to come back from all of the changes that the SSRIs, stands for serotonin reuptake inhibitors, um, all of the changes that had happened to my mind and my body from being on Prozac in my teenage years took me a while to come back from and to be completely healed. And I don't even know if I still am all the way, but I would say that I can tell the difference from when I was on them and now. And also, it's a sidebar. It's very interesting just to think about the fact that your brain's still developing up until you're 25, 26, they say. But your brain is always growing and then to be on a medication that specifically changes your brain is a heavy consideration in and of itself. So I don't even really have a real frame of reference of who I was before the medicine, the Prozac, and who I am today. But I'm thankful that I'm here today, and I'm thankful that I have grown into the man that I am. And when I hear stories like Chris Herron's, I'm especially thankful. So I was prescribed anti-anxiety medication, Prozac on one end, but also benzodiazepine, Xanax. And Xanax is one of the most dangerous drugs. Benzodiazepines are one of the most dangerous group of drugs in the world, especially pharmaceutical drugs, especially drugs that are being prescribed, at mass. You could say, and the reason why benzodiazepines are so dangerous, and Jordan Peterson, who's another truth teller, ran into a struggle with these, and he's actually a clinical psychologist, and is probably been a person who prescribes these drugs to his patients, as well as obviously he took them himself, and even he ran into problems with them, and that he knows how to take them, he knows the dangers, he knows the guidance, and all of that. That tells you how dangerous these drugs are, and I'll tell you why. Um, Benzodiazepines work on the same part of the brain that alcohol does. And sometimes they're used for anxiety, but they're also used as an anti-seizure medication. And because of that, if you take them regularly, and God forbid, if you abuse them, if you come off of them too quick or cold turkey, your brain will seize. It actually can cause the problem of your brain having a seizure, and that obviously can be fatal. And people do die for that reason. And so what Xanax does effectively is it hijacks the central nervous system, and it turns the central nervous system down, so that you're not getting all of the adrenaline and fight or flight response that causes panic attacks. So for that reason, it's a very dangerous drug. So I'm prescribed this drug, and after this Chris Herron presentation seminar, I go back to my hotel room, where we all have our own hotel rooms in Hoboken for this transition program. And I go back to my hotel room and I read through the entire collective bargaining agreement, which nobody does. I mean, not only the players in my class, nobody reads through these agreements at all, just as a common practice. This is why you get an agent. This is why you get an attorney. This is why you get all these little ancillary people around an NBA prospect or an athlete, so they can do that for you. You just focus on basketball. Well, I was a little bit of a whack job, I guess you could say. Please Call Me Crazy, I went back and I read through the entire collective bargaining agreement word for word. I actually read it twice just so I could make sure. And what I found was that there wasn't a single mention of mental health or anxiety in the entire document. That worried me because now I started to ask myself, well, from a contractual standpoint, what are the protections around mental health, insurance, all of these things? These questions started to bubble up in my mind. Is like, okay, what's the legal, what's the formal, technical way that the NBA views mental health? I'm not talking about what the fans, what's put out on commercials, what's told to the writers, what's talked about casually over steaks from the GMs. I mean, on paper, legally, structurally, in precedents. What is mental health in the NBA? What does it mean? What does it function as? And I started to ask those questions. And the one thing that concerned me the most, which was personal, is that benzodiazepines were listed in the banned substance portion of the collective bargaining agreement. And so obviously my first question was, well, I'm prescribed this banned substance. So how do we deal with that? And the response was, well, if you're prescribed, it's okay. This is a classification of people who are procuring these drugs, illicit drugs off of the street with no prescription. I said, okay, I get that. But then I started to ask the follow-up question of, is the reason why these drugs are on this list because of how dangerous they are? And this is when I was taught or told by a doctor or a number of medical professionals why Xanax is so dangerous. Now, remember, I'm 21 years old. Now, I hadn't taken Xanax much up until this point, but I did have a walking prescription for it in case I needed it. So I really didn't even know about Xanax, the effects of it or any of that stuff, because I had never really taken it or needed it. When I flew at Iowa State and I was nervous about flying, I took Benadryl, and that actually gave me some other side effects. Benadryl kind of make you slow to the punch, and a few times I tried that and I couldn't take it. So from that point on, we actually won those games where I was on the Benadryl, but I definitely could feel a difference in my overall performance and alertness. But after that, I was just suffering through the anxiety that I had from flying without drugs. And so, I'm having these conversations with the NBA about the drug policy, about mental health. And we come to this place where I say to the NBA, we need to, and I'm willing to sit down and really figure out something we can put in writing around this mental health topic. I don't care what it is. I'm not saying what it needs to be. All I'm saying is that there's nothing here in my contract for us to go on, but this is a very real health thing that I deal with and I'm actually medicated for. So even if it's the insurance and how all of that works, I'd like to see something on paper about what's the league's stance on this. And the league, which is very rare for the NBA or organizations like the NBA, but especially the NBA, the league wanted to operate on play it by ear basis, a wing it basis. We'll make it up as we go. You can trust us. You can trust us. You can trust that, we understand mental health. We understand anxiety. We understand drugs and banned substances. We understand all that. We have a wealth of knowledge. All of our doctors around the league understand this well. You can trust us. We don't have to put anything in writing. We're just going to go forward. Well, I wasn't going to allow that. I mean, the conversation went from being casual and informal and friendly or amicable to being hostile and contentious in a heartbeat, because now I was being led into a deeper understanding about what was really going on here and how, in the mental health conversation, giving me a viewport into this deeper issue. And I know we're about 45 minutes in, and I just thought it was important to give you that background because many people have questions about that, and there's been countless amount of misinformation put out there about that very part of my story. And so now that we got that out of the way, I don't really ever want to have to revisit it again because it still makes me a little angry to this day. But what I came through in that is to this understanding that the reason the NBA wanted to play it by ear with when it came to mental health and not put anything in writing is wasn't just because of liability, right? That was the conventional wisdom at the time is, well, they don't want to be tied down to any liability when it comes to mental health or people who are potentially, mentally unstable or anything like that, which is a gross misrepresentation of mental health to start. Most people struggle with mental health in some shape or form. Most people could actually, in theory, meet the criteria to be medicated for the things that they deal with. And I'm not saying that people should be or that I'm advocating for big pharma and psychiatric medication. In fact, I'd actually advocate against it. But I just saying by conventional, mainstream, established, authoritative science and medical practice, many people would meet the criteria of being medicated or be able to use some form of medication for their mental health. And the NBA is within that within the parameter and use that accepted authoritative mainstream clinical science, medicine. And so with this, they just wanted to wing it. They wanted to play it by ear. And that sent up another red flag. First, there was no mental health in the collective bargaining agreement. And I thought, that seems like a pretty egregious misstep given everything I know about comprehensive health models. And then it was, we want to play it by ear. Now that's the second red flag. And so we get into this conversation behind closed doors about mental health at its root. And I come forward into the conversation and I say, listen, I know the NBA is a business and I know that mental health may seem like a burden or it may seem like an inconvenience, but what I'm here to offer as a young man just trying to navigate this industry, this new career, this new profession with exactly who I am and being honest about it. What I would like to offer is an open dialogue with other medical professionals and experts of your choosing that can help us get our bearings in this conversation, that can help us understand each other and then figure out a way where we can understand each other on paper so that the expectations between the league, the team, the union, and myself as a player are all on one accord. And what the doctors from their side of the table came in and said is, we should have, he's right. We should have a mental health policy. This is long overdue. This is something that we should really consider putting in place. And the response from the league across the board was no, we're not doing it. We're not putting anything formal in place. We're not putting anything in writing. You, Royce, you are going to either play. Well, they sent an emissary to tell me this. You're either going to, who wasn't even officially a part of the NBA, might I add. And this was a whole crazy situation that happened where the NBA was sending me to the psychiatrist. This is what they did. I said, listen, until we put a policy in place, my doctor and a team of doctors has advised me that I shouldn't participate. Like we got to put this together because what I wasn't going to do is live under the presumption that an NBA team is the bastion of morals and ethics, especially when it comes to contractual practice, because they're not. And no corporation is. And that's a much wider discussion we should have about America's corporate culture, but the corporate culture writ large. So I wasn't going to trust on faith that the NBA was going to operate in good faith because there's nothing good faith about the NBA's community or any of their little corporate network. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So I wasn't going to operate on good faith. I wanted something in writing. And I said, listen, until we get this in writing, it could be 48 hours. Until we get this in writing, I'm going to kick back. I'm going to sit. I'm going to, I'll sit out until we get this done. Because I don't want any misunderstandings. Let's start off on a good foot. Remember, I'm just coming in as a rookie. I'm thinking in my head, I still have a clean sheet. There were all these questions about anxiety and how to look at it, and look at this golden opportunity. Me and the Houston Rockets, we get to solve this issue on the front end before I ever step foot on the court. We're all going to be on one accord. Call Fred Hoiberg, ask him and my college team doctor how they did things, how they approached it. We can have this town hall meeting around the campfire, and before you know it, we'll be off and running. And hey, look, we may have even done something, transformative and trailblazing in the meantime. Win, win, win. Nope, we're not putting anything in writing. We're not putting anything in writing. You're going to play, young man. You're going to play, or we'll make sure that nobody ever hears you bring this conversation or message that you want to bring about mental health or any of these other greater issues. And that was explicitly told to me in a psychiatrist's office. His name is Aaron Fink, who I really liked, but he was the team psychiatrist, or the psychiatrist that was used for the Houston Rockets from Baylor University. And in response to me asking to put this policy together, the Houston Rockets, one, lied to the media. They lied to the press. They said that I had gone AWOL. This was Daryl Morey's work, by the way. Daryl Morey claimed that I had gone AWOL, that I was absent without leave. But really, when you say AWOL in common parlance, it's meant to say that somebody went off the reservation. And there's an implication that they're sort of crazy. I mean, would you say that makes that's true? Right. Okay. When I'm talking to my producers here in the studio, it was implied that I was too psychologically unstable to show up, which wasn't true at all. I was having a very rational, very grounded, very logical conversation with the organization about the terms of my employment and the understanding between us on an issue that they had failed to lay out in their very in-depth collective bargaining agreement. And the CBA is a very in-depth document. And so their response was, you're going to go to the psychiatrist every day. Every day until you want to play, you're going to go to the psychiatrist. We're going to treat you, and then they try to mock me. We're going to treat you the same way we would if you had twisted your knee. If you can't compete, if you can't practice, then you need to do treatment. And your treatment is you got to go to the psychiatrist every day. Now, on the first day I walk into Aaron Fink's office, whose office was in the medical center. If you know anything about Houston, Texas, the medical center in Houston is so big, it's its own downtown area. You got the Galleria, you got downtown Houston, and then you got the medical center. And so his office was in the medical center, which I hadn't been to yet. And the first day I walked in, he goes, I was told a little bit about your story, but I'm not sure still. I'm still not sure why you're here exactly. And so I told him my perspective on the situation and what I had asked the team for and all of those things. And by the end of the first psychiatric session, he actually agreed with me. And he goes, yeah, I think they should have a mental health policy. I think they could have one. I think it'd be very easy and beneficial to both sides for the players who do suffer from these mental health issues behind closed doors and in private and try and hide it. I think it'd be beneficial for them to step out of the shadow and get help and collaborate with their organizations to be the best player that they possibly can be. Best person for sure, but surely that would benefit the organization and help a player's performance. So he was all for it, and he actually offered to go back to the team and give them his expert opinion that this could be achieved. This policy could be achieved. It could be created, and it could be beneficial for all parties involved, that it was a great opportunity. And he wasn't just selling it. I mean, like this guy, these doctors who work around the NBA, let me help. A lot of these, they're not donating their time, but they're not getting paid a crazy amount of money on top of what they already make. A lot of these doctors are donating their time, and they love the sports and they love the NBA, and they offer to give their medical guidance to sports teams, either because with some partnership at the corporate level, or because they're just really good doctors and they're big fans of the team. So they're not getting paid a big, huge sum of money different than any other doctor to help these organizations. So he was like, especially a psychiatrist, a team psychiatrist who they only go and use when they have one of these types of situations pop up. So he's like, look, I'm willing to help out with this. This is nothing. This is child's play. He even said to me, he goes, look, they want you to come here every day. I told them that my most manic patients, I'm talking about patients who have hallucinations, who actually hear voices, who are on Valium or high doses of anti-hallucinatory medication. They only come see me at most 2 times a week. Now, you could argue that may be because of the cost of seeing a psychiatrist and the fact that most medical coverage doesn't cover psychiatric, care or psychiatric appointments. So most people can't afford to come see go see a psychiatrist more than 2 times a week, if that. But it's just not common practice. And we had that conversation. I asked about, what is the real guidance around the frequency of psychiatric visits from a patient and the cost thing. And he was like, even if they could afford it, there's just not much more that can get done beyond 2 times a week. That's the limits. That's the threshold of our psychiatric help at the extreme end. You have a very common, very mild, but still impactful form of anxiety. You're not you got up, you put your clothes on today, you ate breakfast, as you told me, this is him talking. You drove across town, and it's 30, 40 minutes. If you live in Texas, everywhere is 30, 40 minutes. You drove across town to the medical center. You're sitting here in my office. You're having a completely rational conversation with me. This is a mild form of anxiety. You are not an extreme case for me in my years, in my expertise. This is one of the most revered psychiatrists at Baylor Medicine. So he goes back to the team and he says, I want to help you put this together. And I think Royce was right. And they just brush him off. Nope, not doing it. This is Daryl Morey, by the way, who now is the GM, I believe, at the Philadelphia 76ers. And this podcast, usually these are going to run about an hour and a half, but this is the first one, and I didn't foresee telling this story this way. And I want to get into some other things, but I want to make sure that I finish the story off the right way so that everybody understands where I'm coming from. We may push to 2 hours just as a forewarning, and especially a forewarning for my good friend Patrick here, the producer. But I want you to understand this. And the reason why is because basketball and NBA basketball is by far one of the most influential cultural institutions in our society. There's no doubt about that. And too little is made of its impact. And if you go look at Wikipedia and you see how they tried to paint my story, you get a glimpse into the mainstream establishment's authoritative source narrative, and you start to understand why I'm where I'm at today and why I fight the way I do against this type of corruption. So let me continue and bear with me, please. I know we're deep into it, and feel free to listen to it in segments. I don't want to tie you down and make you listen to the Royce White story, but there's people out there who really don't know this, and they've been lied to. And before I go into anything else, if you're new to the show, which I know many of you aren't, and many of you probably have heard me tell the story, but if you're new to the show, I want you to know who I am before you hear me tell you what I think. I want you to know where I came from, why I have the perspective I do. And so this is why I'm taking the time to do this. So Daryl Morey shuts Aaron Fink down. He's kind of the top guy in charge of managing the Royce White situation. And so I'm still scheduled to go here every day. Now what the NBA does in response, I write a letter an email letter to David Stern. I ask him to step in. I go and talk to the Players Union. I ask them to step in. But at the time, Billy Hunter, who was our executive director at the Players Union, was seeing a bit of controversy and trouble himself, and he actually ended up being removed and indicted for embezzling funds and I think he might have served some jail time if I'm not mistaken. So that was the head of the union at the time when I was dealing with this. So you can imagine how that threw a curveball in there. But there were a few people who were assistant or deputy directors at the union at the time that were helping me with the situation. One of them being Ron Klempner, who I want to give a shout out to. Hey, Ron, how you doing? Many of you wouldn't even know Ron. I could say Ron Klempner's name to the media in a room full of mainstream media. They wouldn't even know Ron, probably. But Ron was in charge of collective bargaining negotiations at the union. He was the attorney that oversaw the collective bargaining agreement. So this was his area of expertise. So he was helping out. We called him and we said to come in. So here's what they did. They brushed Aaron Fink off, Dr. Fink. They said, we're not dealing with, nah. We called you. You fix the boy's brain, is what they said. You make his brain right. He's saying that he's anxious or he has anxiety about policy. We don't know what that means. Our policies are fine. You fix the boy's brain and you get him back to the court as soon as possible. And Aaron Fink said, listen, I'm not going to be able to do that for you guys because, number one, with everything that's been presented to me, the only clinical advice I can give is that it is a serious threat to his overall health to proceed in this sort of play it as you go, darts in the dark sort of approach to mental health and to the young man's anxieties and like the communication between you guys. I don't want to recommend that. I can't recommend that in good conscience. So then they say, okay, well, let's send in Dr. Taylor. Dr. Taylor is the joint doctor, the director of the entire medical program between the NBA and the union. He sits in between. This is the arbiter of arbiters. This is the guy who oversees the entire medical documents for the banned substance, any medical things that come up between teams and players, between teams, all of it. He's the medical director. So they fly Dr. Taylor in to Houston, and we meet at a hotel. We talk for about 2-3 hours. At the end of our conversation, he comes back and goes, I agree. We need a mental health policy. You're right. I'm going to call him back. We're going to get everybody on the phone. We're going to try and put a policy together. This shouldn't take long. It's easy to do. You're not asking for anything crazy, because I wasn't asking for anything really, except I asked that when it's possible that I'd be able to bus to games, which would alleviate the need for me to take benzos to damper the anxiety from flying. So, for example, if we were playing in Minnesota one night and we played in Chicago the next night, I would drive from Minnesota to Chicago, which is a 6-hour drive. And mind you, it's a much longer hike and a much less luxurious hike than on a private charter jet. And the Houston Rockets had their own private jet, and it's not a little jet. This ain't like a little tiny private jet. They had like a 737 private jet, full catered, decked out. How do I know this? Because I had been on it, right? I'd actually flown, which the Wikipedia story won't tell you, but I was on the Houston Rockets jet a number of times before I asked for this accommodation. And so, Dr. Taylor goes, yeah, I mean, you should be able to drive from Charlotte to DC. I don't see why not. You should be able to fly drive from New Orleans to Houston. It's like a 3-4 hour drive from New Orleans to Houston, or Dallas to Houston, or Chicago to Milwaukee, or let's say Boston to New York City, or Memphis to Atlanta, or LA to Phoenix, and the list goes on. And so when we really started to look at the list of teams, this revelation happened that the league is much more regional based than people really get, than people understand, because there's this entire narrative that's been built around this 82 game schedule and the need to fly on back-to-backs and all of this. But when you really boil back down to the fundamentals, the NBA is a very regional based league. It started regionally. It continues to be regional. In fact, the conferences and the conferences, the Western and Eastern Conference, is broken down into regions. Most people don't even really realize that anymore, but there are still regions that are sub-conferences within the bigger Western Eastern Conference. And so when we really started looking at the schedule, Dr. Taylor was the first one who was like, man, now that I'm looking at it, there's so many places that are in driving distance. You're probably not going to have to fly that much, right? And I mean, if you have to go back to back from LA to New York, then you just got to fly, and is what it is. Or Miami to New York, or even San Francisco is a nice hike from Los Angeles, even, or the West Coast, like from Houston to Phoenix, is the West Coast stretches are a little too big to make that drive in a reasonable time. So and I was good with that. I was like, okay, great. If I got to fly, I'll fly, but if I can drive, I'll drive. And the Houston Rockets actually were cool with that. They agreed to do that. Now, they went back to the NBA and they asked the NBA, could they provide an RV for me to drive? And the NBA told them no. The NBA told them that it would be that the NBA would consider it a salary cap infraction for them to provide an RV for road travel, and that they could potentially be fined millions of dollars, or they could be subject to the loss of draft picks. And so that was flag number 3, right? You had the collective bargaining agreement not mentioning mental health. And then you had, what was that second one? The second one was us not wanting to put anything in writing. We want to play it by ear. And then there was your accommodation is not only something that we reject, we are actually going to threaten to use it legally as a means of punishment towards an organization. So now, not only do you not want to deal with the issue and you don't want to pin the issue down, now you want to use the issue and weaponize the issue. And you're even willing to go against your medical experts here who you've paid. I didn't find these people. You paid and brought these people in. You're even willing to go against their recommendation to weaponize this against me. So in all of this, it kind of reinforced my gut intuition that you can't trust these people. You can't trust them. I had every right to feel like I shouldn't operate with them on good faith, because people listen to your gut sometimes. I listened to my gut at 21 years old, and I found it to be true that these people weren't trustworthy. They didn't operate in good faith. They operated how much of the corporate community operates, and it's a cutthroat, barbarous, no ethics, no morals, watering hole. And so, after I heard that, after the Houston Rockets came back and said the NBA saying we can't provide bus travel because it'll be considered a salary cap infringement, and we may try and give a bus to Dwight Howard in free agency, who many people thought they were going to go after in free agency, and they did end up going after in free agency. And that shows you how much they talk behind the scenes in the NBA, the little small NBA community, because the NBA was already making decisions around general policy that was based on their intimate knowledge that the Rockets were vying or aiming for Dwight Howard in free agency. And they ended up acquiring Dwight Howard within the next 12 months of this whole conversation taking place. So that just gives you a little bit of background on how tight this little NBA community is and how much they talk, which they also talk with media the same way. And so now I'm pissed off. I'm like, you know what? Now we have to have a policy. I'm not going to tolerate. I'm not going to deal with this fly by the seat of our pants wing. Not with my health. Not with my psychological well-being, not with my overall health. I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. If I'm not going to play, or if you guys are going to try and blackball me, then that's what it is. Let's figure it out. So they scheduled this meeting between Daryl Morey, Aaron Fink, Dr. Fink, our team doctor, Dr. Jim Muntz, who I love and still talk to this day. I call him up with any health question I have. He's a great individual, and myself. And I also had a not a personal assistant, but a sort of mentor, a family friend that was spending time with me, helping me navigate this. And he was also in the room as well, because I was smart enough not to go into any room alone, because no telling what they're going to say I said or didn't say, or what they'll say they said or didn't say. So he's in the room with me, and we're set to meet because Dr. Fink has had a conversation with Daryl Morey by phone, and they want to bring this thing to a close. They want to resolve this thing. Dr. Aaron Fink is begging not to run up any more billable hours for his psychiatric services, which is super rare. He's like, look, I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, this guy's coming every day. There's nothing wrong with him. What he's asking for is reasonable. Stop sending him here. It's wasting my time. I don't want to be on the phone with you guys about this. Come in here, sit down, have a conversation. Let's figure this out, write this policy up. Boom, boom. We'll be done. Dr. Muntz is kind of, he's kind of just the formal cog in the wheel. So he's in the room just, as the team doctors. If anything comes out of this conversation that he needs to be aware of going forward, then he can have that firsthand knowledge and have been there from the beginning. So we're all sitting in the room. I get there a little bit early. We're all there waiting. Daryl Morey comes in. He's real flustered. He's sweating. He's shaking. If you know Daryl Morey, you know anything about him. He's a little bit of an awkward turtle himself. He's got a little bit of a weirdness to him socially, which, that's not my problem with him. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of people out there who I know who have those sort of social awkwardness, and, it is what it is. I have a problem with the fact that he's a liar, and I'll explain that right now. We're sitting there. Daryl Morey comes in, and he just starts going off. I mean, he didn't give Dr. Fink a chance to talk. He didn't give Dr. Muntz a chance to talk. He didn't give anybody a chance to talk. What he did was he presented me with a letter, and it was a thick letter. I mean, the letter was probably, I don't know, maybe 13, 14 pages long. And he said, you don't have to read it now, but basically what it says is, if you don't return to the court, we will continue to fine you until your salary to the money owed to you is $0. We'll just fine away your entire contract. And then we'll void your contract. After we fine you, we'll void your contract. And if you want to take it to arbitration, we can take it to arbitration, and you'll never play again in this league. That's what he said to me. I remember it to this day. Makes my skin hot to this day. One, because he talked with a tone that was real aggressive. And, it's one of those things that this sort of disanchored, detached corporate structure has afforded certain individuals to walk with this air of superiority. And it had nothing to do with race. I mean, it may have marginally had something to do with race, but not of consequence, in my opinion. Because he would have talked like this to a white player if the white player had done the same thing I was doing. But he talked with this intensity, like he had no fear that the way he was talking to me or any form of disrespect could end in any real physical altercation. And that bothers me because, I'm 6'8", 260 pounds, and if it were not for certain social norms that have grown in a post-technological America, or certain privileges of certain individuals in certain parts of this economy that we've built, right? Higher ups to C-suite. If it weren't for that, I'd slap the taste out of his mouth for the way that he was talking to me. Not only for the way he was talking, the tone he was using, but what he was implying and what he was trying to do. He was basically using my dream, my childhood dream, the one I had worked very hard to achieve and get to, and one that he had only went to Northwestern Business School and studied analytics and played, the GMs, they're the highest level of fantasy basketball, okay? And this guy's threatening me about a policy that's been suggested by his own medical staff. And he's telling me, in effect, we're going to blackball you if you don't stop pushing this agenda. If you don't stop with this mental health conversation or this request about policy, we're going to blackball you. I'm telling you. I didn't put my hands on, that's for sure. But I didn't even really get that upset. I just told him, I don't know what about the research you've done on me or any conversations we've had makes you think that you could threaten me in this way and that I would cave to it, but I'm not. I won't cave to it. And in fact, all you've done is you've made me double down. If you really have a problem with anything that I'm requesting, take it up with your doctors here. Or you know what? Go pick some new doctors. Throw them all out. We could go line up some new doctors and let's see what they think. We're not doing that. No, we're not doing that. And, then he said, then he made this grave mistake. This was a grave mistake on his part that many people won't know about, and the NBA will try and cover up for him because they like Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey and the whole MIT analytics, the Sloan Analytics Conference, that's all about the digitalization of the NBA, is Daryl Morey's baby. And in fact, if you really go back to the history of the inception of NBA China, it was the Houston Rockets that were the on-ramp for their China relationship because of Yao Ming. So their relationship with the Houston Rockets at the time and Daryl Morey was more intimate than people really realize. He basically said in front of his own medical staff, this is Daryl Morey at the time, he goes, well, we didn't even know you had anxiety before we drafted you. Now, mind you, again, my story was one of the biggest stories in the draft. This story about my stock and my NBA readiness and my stock being in flux because of this mental health question and my time at Iowa State with Fred Hoiberg and all. This was a huge story in the draft, okay? Not only that, but it had been covered extensively in mainstream USA Today, Sports Illustrated did an entire feature on it. In the Sports Illustrated edition, with LeBron James on the cover after they had won their second Miami, maybe it was either their first or their second title with the Miami Heat. So this was a big story. It's not one you could miss. And even more importantly, it's not one you could miss if you did the due diligence that the GMs in every organization did. And actually, when I was in Ames, Iowa, preparing for the draft, I had a private investigator. Let me show you how thorough they are. The NBA, the same NBA institution that didn't want to go and put anything down on paper. They didn't want to be too formal. They wanted to play it by ear. Let me show you how formal and thorough they are. I had a private investigator call me up at 7:30 in the morning. I'm living in Ames, Iowa still. I'm just working out every day, training, getting ready for the draft. Call me up in the morning and say, hi, my name is XYZ. I don't remember his name or else I'd say it. My name is such and such. I'm a private investigator. I work for a number of organizations that, have, that would like to, know a little bit more about you. They're interested in you and they'd like to know a little bit more about you. Are you willing to sit down and talk with me? Well, I know this is one of the tests right here. Is if you're not willing to talk with the guy, then you're obviously hiding something, and then they're going to go dig deeper into whatever it is that they think you're hiding. So I actually sat down with the guy. We went to Hy-Vee. If you're from the Midwest area or if you're from Iowa, you'll know Hy-Vee, and Hy-Vee has a great breakfast, a sneaky good breakfast. I invite anybody who's in the Ames area or a place where there's a Hy-Vee to go mosey on down to the Hy-Vee and enjoy the breakfast. That is not an ad or a plug. I don't want you to think this is a breakaway or an ad from the podcast. That was a genuine recommendation for Hy-Vee breakfast. So I'm sitting at Hy-Vee with the guy, and we talk for about 2 hours, 3 hours. I mean, I like to talk. I hope I'm not talking you guys zero off the day. I love to talk. It's no problem. I love having good conversations. So we're talking about 2 or 3 hours long. And at the end of it, he goes, you know what, Royce, it was great to meet you. I wish you the best of luck. I work for several organizations. So this one private investigator worked for a number of teams. He didn't just come on behalf of one team. He came on behalf of a number of teams, which shows you that they kind of pooled in vetting out the young players. They kind of pool their resources in a very strange way. I don't know why they would trust each other in that way, but they do, and that might say something for a bigger consideration. But he says, "Look, I enjoyed the time here today. I appreciate it. This is one of the most interesting and what did he say? He said interesting and fun conversations I've had in my 20 years of doing this. So I just wish you the best of luck, and I know you'll do great things in the future. So, good luck with everything in front of you. And that was the end of it. And I went back to the gym, and I went to train and for that day, and didn't hear from that guy ever again. But I knew the NBA had sent him, right? So fast forward, I only tell you that because Daryl Morey in this meeting with his own medical staff, who received my medical records from my college, from Iowa State, said with no hesitation, "We did not know you had anxiety before we drafted you." And that got him in some trouble because my agent now, who wasn't particularly on my side in these things and willing to really go and fight on my behalf, who was Andrew Vi at the time, who worked for Andy Miller, who is the only agent on record to be banned from the NBA for his role in this whole what was my guy's name? The whole Adidas Nike situation that happened a few years back where players were being paid or whatever. And, that whole deal that went down. Andy Miller, who was my agent at the time, who also still to this day, I think, or at the time had negotiated the biggest contract in NBA history, which was Kevin Garnett's. He was my agent, and they weren't particularly interested in having this fight about mental health with the NBA, even though my agent Andy was the guy who helped create the concussion policy in the NBA because of Carlos Delfino. Now, I might be saying names you don't even know, but feel free to go look these guys up. Andy Miller was my agent. Andrew Vi worked for Andy Miller. Carlos Delfino, who played for the Houston Rockets, mind you, had suffered from a concussion or something like that, and Andy had helped the NBA create the new concussion policy the year before I had gotten to the NBA. Okay, so, and again, to give you a perspective, there was all this conversation about why putting a policy in place was impossible. Oh, you got to get all the owners together. They'll never agree. Or, there's no way to modify or create an addendum for the collective bargaining agreement. We have to wait till the next one gets signed. It was all a lie. It was all a lie from the start because they had implemented an addendum for the concussion policy a year before I had gotten there. A year, like literally 12 months before I had gotten to the NBA. And this was my agent, by the way. And yet still he wasn't willing to have this fight. And I thought that was odd. But for some reason, when Daryl Morey said that he didn't know I had anxiety disorder, now my agent was upset. This was the first time in this whole situation he had shown some real fire. And he's like, if we got to sue the Houston Rockets, I swear I'm going to be at the deposition because Daryl Morey is a complete and utter liar. We had conversations about your anxiety. Fred Hoiberg had conversations about your anxiety well before the draft. They knew, everybody knew. And I'm just sitting there, none of this is shocking me, right? So we're walking out of this office. Daryl Morey storms out. Dr. Aaron Fink goes, you know what? I apologize. I talked to him on the phone last night. That is not what he told me he was coming in here to do. I thought we were going to come to a resolution and this would all be moving in a better direction. I did not know he was going to ambush you like that. That was completely inappropriate, and I'm very upset he used my office to do it. He's kind of trying to cover his own tracks now because there's ethics medically that now he's roped into it, Dr. Fink, from a liability standpoint. So he's kind of trying to ramp it down, to calm the situation down. And I said, you don't have to apologize. This is the gap between your field, the field of medicine or medical experts, and I keep going back to that experts for a reason. We'll circle around to that soon, I promise. But this is the gap between the business practice and your expertise. They don't really respect your opinion anyway, which speaks volumes about why they would send me here in the first place. I guess we're both in the same boat. We're over here on the same bench. We're the your opinion don't count crew. And so now I walk out and Dr. Muntz walks out as well. And I asked Dr. Muntz, just to be sure, you guys received my medical records, right? Before I when I got to the team from Iowa State. He says, yeah. I mean, I got your medical records twice from Iowa State. And we saw the Prozac prescription, and we saw the notes from Dr. Showman, who is now the head of all of medicine at Iowa State Athletics, and is another great doctor who's a very, very dear friend of mine. Has always looked out for me and cared for me, when it comes to anything health related. Dr. Showman sent over my records and he made all the notes, and he even had a personal conversation with Dr. Muntz about my anxiety and just, this is the things Roy struggles with, and, this is how we dealt with it, and it was no problem. To give you a more context, I never missed a single game or practice at Iowa State because of anxiety. Not one. I didn't miss a single game or practice or even workout for that matter because of anxiety. So I wasn't a kid who needed all these special accommodations in order to get me to the court, or in order to get me to the game, or in order to get me to the gym, or in order to get me to a team meeting. I was the guy who was at film early, and I'm going to stay late to break it down with coach after the fact. So my commitment was never bothered by my anxiety. I just had anxiety. It's common. After Jim Muntz said that, Daryl Morey stormed out, and he sends this letter that he gave to me in the meeting. Now gets leaked to the media, and I can tell it's from the media. In fact, his name is all but on it in the media. So here is the letter that the Houston Rockets and Daryl Morey gave to Royce White. And it makes all these same claims. They didn't know I had anxiety. They were misled. They were this, they were that. Basically, I lied to them. Me, the 21-year-old kid, the 21-year-old kid who was interviewed by a private investigator for 3 hours at a Hy-Vee over pancakes, lied to them and misled them about who I was in the draft. No, they drafted me, and they thought that I was going to just shut up and play, and I would never read my collective bargaining agreement, or I would never ask a question about policy because I'm so overjoyed at the opportunity to play basketball. Why would I care about any of these other things? I should be ecstatic at the rare opportunity I have. But I didn't see it that way. I saw it a little bit differently. And so from that point on, Daryl Morey was no longer allowed to have any conversation about this topic. He was not allowed in these conversations anymore because my agent called the team, and probably the owner, and threatened to sue them if Daryl Morey continued to spread these type of lies. But the damage was already done. Adrian Wojnarowski, see, all of these people I know intimately. So when you see me comment on the NBA or some of these people from a political standpoint, and then I talk about the things they're talking about today, I know these people intimately. I had personal contact with these people and experience with these people. Adrian Wojnarowski, who is regarded as one of, if not the premier NBA journalist because of his close relationship and credible information and sources within the NBA, whether it be coaches or whether it be front office personnel. He is the guy who tells the draft picks on Twitter before the draft pick is in. You see who Adrian Wojnarowski is now. He's the inside man. So when the NBA and the Houston Rockets needed to paint a narrative about me, they hand the letter to Adrian Wojnarowski, and you can go read Adrian Wojnarowski's article, which is probably still up today. You can pull it up for me if you can, Patrick, where Adrian Wojnarowski basically says, in so many words, this fight for mental health is noble, it's good, but it's from the wrong guy. This is the wrong guy at the wrong time. Royce is lost and confused. He needs to worry about basketball. No, just put in Royce. Yeah, put in Royce White, Adrian Wojnarowski. Go down. Yahoo Sports. Put in Yahoo Sports. Nope, don't put in letter. Just put in Adrian Wojnarowski and Royce White. Yahoo. I should have had this prepared ahead of time, but I didn't. I apologize. Oh, here we go. Right here. November 16th, 2012. Royce White battles with Rockets over anxiety disorder could cost him his NBA career. Adrian Wojnarowski, and the headline. Oh, listen to the starting line. Listen to the first line. I want you guys to understand how misinformation works. And hopefully, as we approach the 90-minute mark, and I only go another 30 minutes, I promise, to get this first backstory episode out of the way, to show you why I am who I am, and who I've become, and why I fight so hard against misinformation, and why this podcast was so important, and why I've committed everything I have to help this podcast get off the ground and share these stories with you guys, is this line right here. This is straight out of the belly of the beast. This is straight out of the heart of the machine. This is straight out of Langley. There's no difference between the misinformation you would get from Langley and what the premium writers at the top of the media industrial complex have been conditioned to write. As a lost, confused young man plays the martyr on Twitter timelines, Royce White's chances to construct a sustainable, there's one of those words, sustainable professional basketball career slips away. He's chasing cheers on the court for the Houston Rockets, but they haven't found him deserving of playing time. So White started to lash out, search for his stardom in cyberspace, and it's turned a combustible partnership into an embarrassing public spectacle. White has left the Rockets, and there's no telling when he'll return. Before long, White will lose the platform that he so desperately wants to advocate for mental illness. He's fighting a noble fight with the most noble of intentions, and perhaps someday he can be remembered as a trailblazer on the issue of anxiety disorders. Yet now, this can't be his crusade, his burden. It's too much. People have tried to tell him this. Royce White needs to save himself and save his basketball career. Without the NBA, his desire to bring awareness to be a champion for change will come to an unapologetic and abrupt end. I don't have to even read anymore. That gives me goosebumps to this day. To hear that come out of the, and look, most of you out there may hear what I just read and go, yeah, he's right. But understand who it's coming from. This is coming from the NBA. This is coming from corporate America. Whether they directly told him to write this or not, whether the editors on high at Yahoo had their hand in this or not, the overall condition of corporate America and corporate culture is to churn out weasels just like this guy, to say stuff just like this to the masses like you, and basically tell you two things at once is really what he was telling you. If you could scroll back up to the top for me, basically he was telling you two things at once, but in effect what he's trying to say is all of you need to understand that the privileges that we give you from on high, the things that we hand down to you, small people, you peasants, what we decide to give you, you must cherish above all. You should appreciate anything that we give you from on high so much that it completely blinds you to any other consideration. That's what he's saying in this opening part of this article. And so if you scroll down, I want to show you that, but he's not dumb, because the machine isn't dumb. Stop right there. The machine isn't dumb. They're not stupid. Langley isn't stupid. They know how to, remember, propaganda is not outright lies. Propaganda is lies, but it's also half truth, and it's the truth taken out of context. And this is a prime example. A lost and confused young man plays the martyr on Twitter timelines. This kid is a martyr. That's all he is. That's all you should see him as. He just wants to be a martyr. Not that I was thrown in a unique position, given my circumstances, to unveil certain things that other players and athletes may not have known or ever come across. That's not it. I came into it wanting to be a martyr. But what I should worry about is my chances to construct a sustainable professional basketball career. Worry about the money. Worry about your career. Make sure it's sustainable. Because we got an inroad on this EPA climate change narrative for the future. Everything's going to become sustainable oriented in the future. And we'll start with basketball. We don't care how we condition you. We don't care if it's basketball. We're talking about, politics, policy. We don't care if we're talking about food. We don't care if we're talking we don't care what we're talking about. We'll start slipping these keywords, these buzzwords in early. This was in the first 2 lines of an article about basketball and anxiety. Move the screen for me down a little bit. This was a line in the first. This was a word, sustainable, in the first 2 lines of an article about a controversy between a basketball player and a basketball organization. Okay, I'm just showing you. But they haven't found him deserving of playing time. Now what they're trying to say is Royce isn't the NBA ready. Selfless to a fault. High IQ, willing passer with a hyper unique skill set for a hyper unique body at 6'8", 275, who plays the point guard. Okay, and tested from an athletic standpoint, shuttle run, full court sprint, shuffle drill, all tested off the charts. Speed, agility, athleticism, explosiveness, broke the bench press record. I would have broken the NBA bench press combine had I not pulled a muscle in my neck the day before we tested at the NBA combine in Chicago. So one of the strongest basketball players pound for pound at 21 years old in the NBA's history. All metrics, this guy is ready to play. But the narrative that this guy, Adrian Wojnarowski, wanted to paint is he's not deserving of playing time, and that's why he's lashing out. Let's move this again so I can see a little bit more. This is why he's lashing out. Now I'm searching for my stardom on cyberspace. No, this is what he was doing. This is what the NBA journalists are doing. They're writing stories about athletes. Stop it right there. They're writing stories about athletes to try and get notoriety or some type of recognition as glorified fans of the game. And I'm not taking a dump on sports writers, because there are some great ones out there. But what I'm saying is, for a sports writer to make this claim that I'm not deserving of playing time, and this is the impulse of my fight with the league, is completely inappropriate, and it's unfounded, and it's completely untrue. But he gets to the truth here. This is the double cross and the triple cross of the media. Here comes the truth. Here comes the truth. And remember now, this is all in the first 2 paragraphs. Scroll up a little bit. Just look at where it is. This is the first 2 paragraphs. He goes from saying, I'm lost and confused, to at the end of the second paragraph saying he's fighting a noble fight with the most noble of intentions, and perhaps someday he can be remembered as a trailblazer on the issue of anxiety disorders. He made sure not to say mental health. Just like up above, he made just before that, he goes, White will lose the platform that he so desperately wants to advocate for mental illness. You see how they're framing the conversation away from the broadest topic possible? They don't want to say mental health because they know mental health is a topic so broad that it will change the position that they can take. It'll change the angle that they can use against me in this narrative. If they say mental health, they're working against the narrative that they're using on the other end to forward all of this illegitimate policy. And we'll talk. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I saw it bubble up. I was living in it. I saw it metastasize in articles like this. And I'm sitting there at 21 years old and I'm reading this and I'm going, what is this guy talking about? Where is he getting this stuff? And then it clicked. Oh, this is Daryl Morey and him are writing this together. And then another thing clicked for me. Oh, Daryl Morey and David Stern are writing this thing together. And then another thing clicked for me. David Stern, Daryl Morey, Adrian Wojnarowski, and the entire corporate community that I'm calling into focus are writing this thing together. And they're being very careful with how they say it, because they know there's an emerging narrative out there about mental health and comprehensive health and wellness that they need to weaponize and use next. So they can't cut their legs off here. They can't let this grow out of control and cut themselves off at the knees with this story. This is what I dealt with in the NBA. And so this letter and this article is what emerged after my meeting with Daryl in that room in that doctor's office. And from then, Daryl was no longer able to have these conversations. So now they send in the emissary. Now they send in Mr. Anonymous. And his name was Mr. Goldberg. And Mr. Goldberg was the attorney of Leslie Alexander. Leslie Alexander is the former owner of the Houston Rockets, who owned the team before it was sold to Fertitta. Fertitta owns the Houston Rockets now. He bought it from Leslie Alexander. Now, mind you, when this whole thing kicked off, what I first wanted to do was to talk with Leslie Alexander face-to-face. I requested to speak with Leslie Alexander face-to-face and David Stern face-to-face, and both of them denied to even speak with me in person. Leslie Alexander said he was too busy. He was closing a penthouse in Manhattan. Can you restart that clock for me? It's at 99 minutes. I think it stops there. Will you just hit the reset button for me? And I know we're wrapping up this first episode here, but we're rolling. I want you guys to understand what's going on here. Leslie Alexander won't even come meet with me. He's closing a penthouse in Manhattan, it's $15 million, $20 million penthouse. He done got time to fly down to Houston and waste precious time in his day to come talk to little old me about this little silly issue, right? This isn't on his docket. David Stern says, I don't want to talk to you. I'll talk with your agent. Who's representing you? Who's your agent? Who's your attorney? Maybe I can talk with them. Well, what David Stern's telling me is there's a group of people around the game, young man, that actually run the game, that actually know what's going on here. And I want to talk to them. I want to talk to all the middlemen. Bring the middlemen to the throne and let me speak to them, because once I give them the directive, they'll come back to you and put you back in place. I lived through this. I actually lived through this. And so they send in Mr. Goldberg. This is Leslie Alexander's personal attorney. And Leslie walks in back at the same place now. We're back at Dr. Fink's office. Man, we put Dr. Fink through the ringer in this whole situation. His office became the battleground for one of the most epic backroom fights in sports history. Maybe that's an exaggeration. I don't know. But the implications of this fight were huge. In comes Mr. Goldberg, and he plays the devil's advocate. He plays good cop. He comes in, he walks in, it's afternoon, we're all sitting there, he comes and he sits down and he says, listen, Royce, and by this time I've been out in the media, this whole thing is public. So now I'm speaking like, no, mental health is the greatest social issue we face. We got to have a policy. The way corporations look at mental health and the human condition speaks volumes about where we are in society as a whole. So he comes and he goes, Royce, look, you're an intelligent guy. I like you. I like what you have to say. I agree with you. We do need a mental health policy, and we've overlooked this for a long time, and a lot of players have fallen through the cracks because we haven't had one and we didn't know what we were doing around this issue. I agree with you. We should do this. But if you don't play, if you don't report to the D League, because now the punishment is, oh, you want to step out of line, we're going to send you to the D League. And their excuse is, well, we send all our players to the D League. We send all our rookies to the D League, no matter what. So if you don't report to the D League, I know the arbiter. I mean, we could take your contract to arbitration, but he doesn't know much more about this issue than we do. I know him personally. I mean, he's probably going to side with us, and then who's going to listen to you? And so what Mr. Goldberg used was a personal story where he says, my daughter deals with anxiety. She didn't like to fly either, but I made her get on the plane, and she'll thank me for it later. And I feel a similar way about you. I feel like this is something that he tried to reduce it back down to flying. He knew very well the conversation that we were having about mental health as a policy and as an approach or as a culture within a corporation that has made billions of dollars and is continuing to make billions of dollars on addiction, fanaticism, alcohol, gambling, emotional and psychological detachment. He knew what we were talking about. He believed, he was counting that you at home wouldn't see beyond me flying or not flying, that was going to be the final thumbs up or thumbs down for you at home. Because remember now, the NBA is an institution that largely decides how it behaves or how it acts on public perception. They're a public brand. They're selling a product, which is why you see them behave in a very specific way around controversial issues, whether it be the liberal mania that's broken out now after this, and Trayvon Martin was right around this time, so the whole Black Lives Matter affectation hadn't even really taken off yet, or around issues of the LGBTQ, the John Amici thing that was coming, that was gonna be on its way, the Colin Kaepernick thing that was gonna be on its way. So you see these professional sports teams behave a certain way around certain political, cultural, controversial issues. This one he knew most people had no clue about. And he and the rest of the NBA were going to try and tiptoe their way through all of the land, through the landmines, through the minefield, not trip any wires, but bully me into submission, or if need be, completely turn my mic off altogether so that I couldn't continue to have this conversation I'm having with you today. And so he said, look, my daughter, she was afraid to fly too, and I made her, and she'll thank me one day. And I promise you this, if you go to the D League, if you report to the D League, I will personally see to it that we put a mental health policy in place in the off season, and that we create a program for players to be able to do exactly what you're saying we should do, or what these doctors are saying you should do. I'll personally see to it that happens. With no other choice, I said, okay. I took him for his word. I said, okay. I reported to the D League. I had been fined and I had been suspended and fined upwards of $500,000, $700,000, something like that. They were holding my pay. This entire time I hadn't been paid. I had to take out a loan to even cover my basic monthly expenses. And remember, I'm fresh out of college. Now I had an NBA contract, and somebody was willing to loan me the money based on the prospect that eventually I would start getting paid here. But it wasn't for certain, especially I was being threatened to have my entire contract voided. So I didn't know. And I had just come out of college. I was living in a new city at 21 years old, had never really, lived out of Minnesota other than in Iowa. But I came from the streets. I lived on the streets on my own, so it wasn't like it was total shock for me to be on my own. But it was much different, especially this fight that I was having with the league. And so I went to the D League, and a few months went by, no conversation about it. The D League season was ending, and when it ended, there was no conversation about it. There was no talk about a mental health policy. And in that offseason, I was traded to none other than the Philadelphia 76ers. The Philadelphia 76ers, where Sam Hinkie, who had been in the front office with Daryl Morey and was his understudy, had gotten the head GM job at the Philadelphia 76ers. And they had done a unique trade and swap where Houston actually sent me to the Philadelphia 76ers and paid the money for my contract, which is rare. So the Sixers didn't pick up my contract. The Houston Rockets agreed to pay to get rid of me. And there wasn't a single conversation about mental health at all. And in that offseason, the Philadelphia 76ers cut me before the season started. On a team where the USA Today, the mainstream news, sports news in Philadelphia, said that I was a lock to make this team, that I was a lock to be on this Philadelphia roster. They were rebuilding. They had Michael Carter-Williams, who you may not know, but they had a little younger nucleus. Evan Turner was on this team, Thaddeus Young, Spencer Haas, a few other people as well. And so I was Tony Roden was on that team, my boy Tony Roden, who's from Washington. So they said that I was assuring to make this team. I was one of the first people to be cut in the preseason. One of the first people to be cut. And I remember the day I got cut, I came into the locker room. Who else was on it? Jason Richardson. Shout out to my OG, Jason Richardson. He was on this team as well. He was a veteran at the time, but he was on the team. And he's from Michigan, Midwest guy, so we had a great relationship. We bonded real quick. I remember him bringing me a box of these designer sneakers that he had. We wore the same size shoes, size 15. And one day he was like, man, I got this box of sneakers, young fella, I want, if you want them, you can have them. And it was like stuff I had never even thought about wearing. And in college, I wear basic sneakers and boots. I'm a snow track, you see I'm like I'm a lumberjack kind of guy. And he's got like these Gucci sneakers, there's sneakers with Louis Vuitton on them and all this stuff. And I take the box and I'm just happy. It's like Jason Richardson, I'm like, man, this Jay Rich, and he's giving me some sneakers. I'm probably not going to wear them, but it's cool to get them from him. So I'll take them. Right. So I remember walking into the arena and Kwame Brown was also on that team. I'm sorry. Kwame Brown was also on that team. And both these guys were in their veteran years. They were winding down, but they were still around. And I remember walking into the practice facility the day that I got cut. And when I got cut, I came into the locker room and people knew that cuts were happening. I mean, it was just kind of going around the locker room. And Evan Turner's sitting in there and Thaddeus Young is sitting in there. And when I came in and said I got cut, I remember Evan Turner going, they cut you? Oh, I'm calling my agent. I'm out of here. I'm done. I don't want to be here. Right? There was a shock. There was a genuine shock that they cut me, that they were going to cut me. Why? Because I'm a versatile, well-rounded player. And there's a clip, I think there's a clip on the internet you can go look up. On YouTube, Royce White and Kevin Love. There was a clip in the preseason that shows a preseason game we had versus the Timberwolves where me and Kevin Love get matched up one-on-one, and I basically just drive hard right and knock him right off balance and lay it up. I made it look so easy. I made Kevin Love look. No, you got to go to YouTube. Actually, bring up YouTube. I made it look so easy. It was like Kevin Love I was playing with a kid. And there's no knock on Kevin Love. Kevin Love is a great player. And probably going to be a Hall of Famer. But this is just there you go. Royce White backs down Kevin Love for easy layup. And so if you're watching this, if you're listening, this is me coming across half court with the Philadelphia 76ers in a preseason game, and Kevin Love is matched up with me at the top of the key, and I just move him right out of the way and lay the ball up. It's just real easy. And so, and I'm not saying that this is a sign that, that I'm better than Kevin Love or anything, and actually I was a little bit out of shape at the time. But I had those skills, right? And the other players knew that. They respected that because they saw it in practice every day. So people were genuinely shocked that that I didn't make this team or that I was cut. I wasn't shocked because I understood what had happened. Daryl Morey's boy, who he groomed, Sam Hinkie, had gotten the top job at another organization, and the Houston Rockets wanted to get rid of a headache, which they could justify as making salary cap space so they could go get Dwight Howard. And that's exactly what they did. They went and got Dwight Howard. James Harden had already come to the team, so I'd already met James, but they went and got Dwight Howard. And that was it. That was the narrative. And I was cut. And it was Royce is probably going, not work out. Here comes the draft bust story. And so what was I left with at the time? I was left with a soapbox, right, to try and tell this story about mental health and what I had experienced in the NBA and all of these things I had seen and what I had just witnessed. And the mainstream media is smart in this way because they were willing to take the mental health part of my story and still move it forward a little bit. They were willing to use that part of it, but they would never bring any criticism to the NBA. You can go look up. There were stories that came after I was cut from the Philadelphia 76ers about mental health. and about my story, but they made sure to never really brush up against the NBA in a contentious manner in the narrative. And I played along in that. I mean, I was so angry. I was so frustrated with how the narrative had been spun about me and just about mental health in general that I was willing to try and navigate what I knew was a corrupt mainstream media to tell whatever part of the story I could tell. And so eventually, I think it was after the Esquire article, I had gone to Canada. This was like 2015. I went to go play in Canada, and 2016, 2015. I went to go play in Canada, and Esquire did a feature article. And even though I invite anybody to go read this Esquire article, yeah, here it is. Royce White battles the NBA, battles with the NBA on mental health. This was 2017. But we had done the story about late 2016. So, and see, the headline here is, how Royce White became the most important basketball player alive. And so, even though I would say this is one of the best, told stories of what happened with me and what I was fighting with. Even in this story, you'll notice that they do not want to talk about the NBA in any negative light, right? They do very well and are careful to talk around the NBA's culpability in my story, but with mental health at all. And so after that article came out, I mean, I went rogue. I went rogue, and there would be no remedy. There was no, I want to try and get back in the NBA. I want to try and have the conversations again with the higher ups or the players union. It was none of that. And part of what did that for me too was when I was living in Canada, right around this time, you'll remember, is when Jordan Peterson's controversy popped up with the gender pronouns and that whole deal with Bill C-16 in Ontario, which is where I live, by the way. London, I played for the London Lightnings, a team in the Canadian League, London, Ontario. So this whole Ontario controversy was big where I was, but all across Canada. So I got to see that firsthand too. And as I watched that unfold, it was a very integral part of my own journey because I started to understand what had taken place with me and mental health 3 years prior. And this is what I want you to start with and what I want to start this podcast with. The NBA's rejection of mental health, the NBA's rejection of mental health policy had nothing to do with liability. It had nothing to do with a lack of awareness or knowledge around the human psychology or mental illness or drugs and alcohol, substance abuse. Their rejection of mental health policy was they didn't want to be pinned down and create, they didn't want to get pinned down to a position about a topic that had a far broader scope of strategic implication. And what do I mean by that? And I've said this before, and you may have heard me say this before in other interviews or in clips or, in little clips. The NBA was trying to tiptoe around a conversation about the human condition and mental health as a pretext for them to be predatory around the human psychology when it came to dopamine, when it came to social media, when it came to the internet. Remember, in 2013, the internet was still getting going. I mean, it was still ramping up. The wheels weren't fully spinning yet. And I'm going to keep going beyond 1:30. So don't worry about the time, at least 30 minutes. Tell me when we're approaching 1:20. Or 1:20. Is this approaching 1:20 now? Oh, nice. Okay. Well, just checking with the producer here to make sure what time we're at. and I'm wrapping up this episode anyway, but I wanted to start with this and leave you with this, and we'll be back Wednesday evening, and I won't bog you down with any more Royce White story, but I thought it was important to give you this. The internet was just getting going in 2013. The predicate was being laid for how people would think about their own health, wellness, their own existence in a new technological, social connectivity, internet type world, digital world, and the conversation about mental health and the outgrowth of adverse mental health outcomes from a newly digitized or digitalized world we were starting to see. At the time when I spoke out, we were seeing a huge spike in anxiety, reported anxiety, depression, suicide, drug use. Everything was up at the time. So how to craft the narrative needed to be dealt with carefully. And what they wanted to say was, all of you people out there who are suffering from anxiety or depression or any outgrowth of psychological turmoil from the society that we've all created together, not just the establishment, but the people chose it too. But all of that outgrowth, you either suppress it, you push it down, or you go and get high and you deal with it on your own. And that's what they told me. And that's what they wanted the people to tell. That's the sentiment they wanted me to take from the people, specifically the people that I grew up with, the community I come from. And by and large, I heard this sentiment from the community I came from. The sentiment was, smoke a little weed and get on the plane. All that money you're leaving on the table, smoke a little weed and take a drink, smoke a little weed, get on that plane. That's what I was told. That's what I was told by people I had grown up with, by people from the community. And beyond the community I had grown up in. This was a common sentiment. Flying on a plane bothers you? I don't like to fly either. I smoke a little weed, a couple gummies or whatever the case may be, and you're good to go. Take the Xanax. Take the Xanax is what they were really saying. This is what the establishment wants you to think. This is why I'm here, as I understood this. Take the Xanax. Take the dopamine. Take the dopamine, kid. Take the money and the dopamine. You'll be fine. You'll be great. It'll all work out. In 15 years in the future, after you've racked up a bunch of rebounds and points, and you have all of this fame and glory, and you have this huge platform, remember, Adrian Wojnarowski, sustainable career and platform, once you have that, then you can come back and talk about important issues. Then you can come back and preach to the people or give a message or trailblaze and a point and take the lead on mental health or whatever you want to take the lead on, whatever issues that you think we should be, whatever you want to do, you can do it, but you need us to do it. And in order to play with us, in order to do business with us, you take the money and the dopamine every time. That's almost a cultural norm. You take the money and the dopamine. You get high. You truck through. You track through whatever it is that what you're dealing with, or whatever it is you see. You put those blinders on. You march forward. You take the dopamine. You take the selfish road. Take the selfish road. Take the road with no God. That's what they were really saying. Take the road with no God. And I had the intuition then, and they wouldn't say it. They would never say it. They would never say, take the road with no God, but a Christian man understands. A Christian man understood, and any Christian man would understand this. What they're saying is antithetical to biblical teaching. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. They were the reverse. Seek all the things, forget about the God. That's later on down the road. The morals, the ethics, the values, the greater truth, all of that's we don't know. We're not so big on that. And I had a problem with that. And I had a problem with it. And I didn't know at the time, but when I saw what happened with Jordan Peterson, it was a watershed moment for me intellectually to see that all of this My story was just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle where the human psychology was going to be weaponized. The human psychology, mental health, addiction, dopamine, um, um, serotonin, all of these things, greatly calculated by the establishment, greatly calculated by those medical experts like Aaron Fink, who we're all supposed to trust today. We're all supposed to trust this authoritative science and these go-betweens who say they talk to these medical experts and are informed by their expertise. But I lived through a situation where they look the experts right in the eye and say, go kick rocks, go bite, go pound sand, buddy. Your expertise only matters when we want it to matter, when we say it matters. When we say it matters, that little degree you hang on the wall, or those 4 or 5 degrees, some of people have 10, I don't know. All those degrees you hang on your wall, they only mean something when it comes time for us to need it to mean something. And I had a deep spiritual problem with that. Deep spiritual problem with that. And I've been fighting against the NBA ever since. And I was told, and I was subverted, and I was silenced, and I was shadow banned by the establishment up until George Floyd. And when I marched out and I was right in alignment with what they wanted the narrative to be, young black man standing up against racism in America for for George Floyd and all of this police violence. Oh, they opened the door right back up. Oh, now I wasn't the lost and confused young man that Adrian Wojnarowski said. Now I'm on Rachel Maddow. I'm being featured in the Washington Post. Pull up the Washington Post. I'm just going. I'm not even worried about the time. I'm just going. Episode 1, I'm sure you guys won't mind if it's a bit longer, right? It's a bit longer. We got to get some things out on the table. I'm giving you the backstory. I promise you, most days it's only going to be 90 minutes, but today we're going to get to some stuff. Thank you for sticking with me. I appreciate it, obviously. Here we go. Behind the paywall. Just leave the headline. I just want the headline. We don't even need the article. Royce White towers above the Minneapolis protests and thousands are looking up to him. See, now you had 2 things working here. And you see this young man right here, Robert Klemko. He was actually out there with us during the protest walking. So, now I've crossed over into a different echelon or a different domain of the media industrial complex. There's one thing to be in sports, which is kind of like for all the jerk-offs and the people who are, degenerate gamblers and cokeheads. And then you have politics, right? Or social, I don't know what they would call that, politics or culture or, that sort of thing. Public health in some ways, that one was something like that. But now I've crossed over into this domain. So you got a whole different set of writers at a different generation. Remember, 2020 is 7 years after my fight with the NBA and only 3 years after this Esquire piece. So now they're willing to repaint me. Now I've been vindicated. And don't forget, in between 2017 and 2020, there was the huge story where Kevin Love, who I used for a reason as an example, Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan spoke out about their own issues with anxiety and depression. And when they spoke out, it went wide. I mean, it went green. The machine said, yep, we'll take this. Why? Royce White set the stage for it, but he was a little too radical. He wanted to talk about policy change. He wanted to talk about substantive, fundamental issues within the NBA community that would have huge implications well beyond basketball courts. Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan, with all due respect to him, they took more of an approach of, I'm dealing with anxiety. I'm struggling with this. Feel bad for me, really, is how the narrative was painted around them. Whether or not they wanted it to be or not, that's the narrative they participated in. Feel bad for me and admire me for speaking out. And I don't ever want to discourage people for speaking out. What I'm trying to show you is why the establishment was willing to take a story from Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan and blast it out in the light that they did versus Adrian Wojnarowski calling me lost and confused. There's one simple difference. They weren't asking the establishment to do anything different. They weren't asking any questions about the greater implications around mental health. Kevin Love kept it very simply about anxiety. DeMar DeRozan kept it very briefly about depression. And as a consequence, what happened? The floodgates opened, and player after player in that little short stint of time came forward and started to talk about their own mental health struggles. And Joey Crawford did as well. Joey Crawford, a ref, you had a few coaches. There was this brief 2-month window where 20 players, former coaches, former players, a referee, talked about mental health. And ESPN packaged it greatly. They put a big ribbon around it. Look at this huge turn of events that's happening around mental health, right? And how did they cap it all off? Right back where we started, the MIT Sloan Conference for Analytics, founded by none other than Daryl Morey himself. And who was the MC of this event? Who was the main voice or keynote speaker of this event? Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons, who is also touted as one of the best voices or premier voices in sports commentary, who had taken a very, very radical approach against me as well and said that I was, a prima donna and, who did I think I was and all these other things. In fact, there was an article from Grantland. If you sports people out there know, Bill Simmons used to own a publication called Grantland. And Grantland, Chuck Klosterman, who's a pop writer, not necessarily a sports writer, but he's a pop writer, at the time, he did one of the first interviews, one of the first features on me on Grantland. The story's probably still up there today. Can you pull it up for me? Royce White, Grantland. And Chuck Klosterman's, I got to read you a little bit of this. You'll get a kick out of this. The White Album. Okay, here we go. Grantland, The White Album. January 31st, 2013. Okay, scroll down. Scroll down. Let me see here. Oh, here we go. Oh, they're willing to tell you a little bit. Second paragraph, the third paragraph down, right here. White wants the Rockets to implement what he calls a mental health protocol, a medical curriculum that essentially hinges on White having his own personal psychiatrist decide when he's mentally fit to play. There they go. What I tell you about propaganda? It's not just lies, it's half truth and the truth out of context. Okay. That he wants him to implement a mental health policy. That part will give you. But the reason why is because he wants to have his own personal psychiatrist who doesn't have a conflict of interest, who decides when he's mentally fit to play. Okay, the Rockets feel they've already done enough, including agreeing to transport him to drivable away games so he won't have to fly, which they did do, but the NBA said that they would penalize him and call a salary cap infringement, which this guy fails to mention right here. Okay, enough of that. That's how you should expect the media to behave. This is who Bill Simmons really is, just for you all who think that this guy is a credible and honorable and an integrity-filled journalist. Nope, draw it down. I want you to bring it down a little bit. Oh, this guy gets great in here. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, here we go. Right. Okay. Here we go. And if you could zoom in for me to this little dialogue, I want you guys to understand this and go read it if you get a chance. It's an eye-opening exchange between he and I in this interview. He starts off and he says, "Do you believe 26% of the league is dealing with the mental illness?" Because that was the prevailing statistic around how many people are dealing with mental illness in our country or in society. Around 25% of people are struggling with mental illness. That's the common number that's used, 1 in 4. Do you believe 26% of the league is dealing with the mental illness, or does mental illness prompt those dealing with it to self-select themselves out of the pool? Are you the rare exception who got drafted? Now understand how he's trying to frame the conversation. What he's basically saying is, okay, if we see a prevalence of 26% of people who report that they have mental illness or struggle with mental health issues, does that number reflect in the NBA players, or are you the rare exception? And in most cases, NBA players, because of their profession, prompt themselves out of this pool of otherwise mental health prevalence. What he's saying is, do you think that mental health is prevalent everywhere around the world except with athletes, specifically NBA players? Okay. And I go, The amount of NBA players with mental health disorders is way over 26%. My suggestion would be to ask David Stern how many players in the league he thinks have a marijuana problem. Whatever number he gives you, that's the number with mental illness to start. A chemical imbalance is a mental illness. So, and then this is Chuck Klosterman again. So wait, if somebody has a drinking problem, is that? And I go, that's mental illness. A gambling addiction is a mental illness. Addiction is mental illness. Well, then what's the lowest level of mental illness? What is the least problematic behavior that still suggests a mental illness? I said, the reality is that you can't make it black and white, no matter how much you want to. You have to be okay with it being gray. There is no end or beginning. It's individualistic. If someone tears a ligament, there's a grade for its severity, but there's no grade with mental illness. It all has to do with the person and their environment and how they are affected by that environment. And he goes, okay, I get that, but you classify a gambling addiction as a mental illness. Gambling is incredibly common among hyper-competitive people. The NBA is filled with hyper-competitive people. So wouldn't this mean that, I go, here's an even tougher thing that we're just starting to uncover. How many people don't have a mental illness? But that's what we don't want to talk about. He goes, why wouldn't we want to talk about that? I go, because that would mean the majority of people are mentally ill and that we should base much of our policy around the idea of supporting the mentally ill because they're the majority, right? But if we keep thinking of them as a minority, we can say, you stay over there and deal with your problems over there. He goes, okay, just so I get this right, you're arguing that most Americans have a mental illness? I go, exactly. But if that's true, wouldn't that mean mental illness is just a normative condition that is just how people are? I hope people understand what's going on right here. What they're doing is they're using my fight against the status quo of the human psychology to normalize the decay of the human psychology. And that may be hard for you to grasp, but I want you to start from the place that all of these people are conditioned. They're conditioned by corporate culture. They're conditioned through the universities. They're conditioned by the organizations they work for, the people who oversee and edit their pieces. They're conditioned on what to say and how to say. And what they're saying, in effect, is, yeah, no, mental, you may be right. Gambling, addiction, all of this is normal. But isn't this just the new normal? This is what these people believe is normal. This is what these people have convinced themselves, and many of us, is just the new way of the world. I had a huge problem with that. I rejected that. None of this is normal. None of this is just the way it is. This is what we created. This is what we chose. This is what we've opted into. And many of you at home didn't even know that you signed the dotted line. But when you hear the Chuck Klostermans talk from the Grantlands under the Bill Simmons, who sat on stage at the Sloan Analytics Conference, MIT, with Adam Silver and had this kumbaya moment where Adam Silver, years after I had been in the league, comes on stage and goes, you know what? We're living in an age of anxiety. We are living in an age of anxiety. Chuck Klosterman set the groundwork for that. He laid the groundwork. He's saying this is the new norm. If you're anxious, if you're depressed, if you're addicted, if you're obese, if you're if you're doubtful of yourself, if you hate yourself, all of that is just the new norm. If you're gambling, if you're a gambling addict, you're a drug addict, that's all the new norm. You shouldn't think that's strange at all. This is just the age we live in. And some of the and it's partly true that is the age we live in. The question is, what role do they play in it? They want you to think that they're casual bystanders just looking on to this whole thing go down. They are actively participating and promulgating that culture. They're profiting from that culture. They benefit from that culture. That's why they didn't want a young 21-year-old in the locker room saying, hey, you know that marijuana, that all of this marijuana and alcohol and drugs and gambling and whatever else, you know that there's actually a hindrance on your overall well-being, right? I mean, you do realize that that's not healthy. And here's the most corrupt part. And I want to add this, and I'll say this as a parting shot. It is not lost on me that this mental health conversation that was being woven right here in my own journey, was not being used as a double-edged sword. Because in one respect, they want to completely ignore, reject, or normalize psychological decay. But on the other end, they want to use it for moral decay. And so now this same argument that I posed about the role of institutions and all of these in the individual nature of the human psychology, which is a fact. I mean, it's a fundamental fact that every single brain is unique. Would you argue with that? Would anybody argue with that? Every single brain is unique, scientifically speaking. Every single human brain is unique. It's got its own fingerprint from God. If you're a Christian, you believe that. Every single person has a unique fingerprint. There's a reason for that. We're unique. But now they want to use that same line of thought to say, you don't know whether that person actually is a man born in a woman's body or vice versa. And when the Jordan Peterson controversy broke out, I saw the whole picture, clear as day. I saw the conversation I had and the angle I had taken and how the overall spirit of that angle was going to now be turned on people like a Tommy gun. And they were gonna drive it forward, which is why I'm here, which is why I started a podcast, to undo, unwind, untangle some of these narratives, which is why I spent an hour and a half, almost 2 hours or maybe more on my story. So you can understand that I came from in it. I came from a culturally democratic community. I came from inside the machine. I came from inside the NBA, the corporatocracy, the woke corporations. I came from inside this beast, the belly of it. I was there when the narratives were being forged, when the narratives were being written, when the future was being written, when the algorithms were being written. I lent to it. And in large part, I regret that. This is why I'm here, because I can see how what I said right there in that interview, how mental health is individualistic. It's not black and white. It's just, there's a gray area. Now that same suggestion, that gray area, that lack of black and white has been used to blur the lines about a young boy being a young boy or a young girl being a young girl. And that's not what I meant at all. What I meant is that every young boy or girl has an individual brain. And that let's be honest about the society we've built and the effect that has on the brain. From any number of places that you could look, not predicated around sex or sexual preference or sexual identity. That's a false catharsis. And that's what I'm really here to try and convey. And that's what we're going to continue to talk about, is the establishment and the system providing you a false catharsis, a workaround for a predatory malpractice, a predatory ethics and business culture, corporate culture, globalist agenda that they need you to sign up for, but they can't let you die in it all on one day. They gotta massage your mind in many ways so that you can continue to sign up for it. And if they have to use a Royce White and his perspectives on mental health and the human psychology, they'll use it. And they'll use anything that they can use. And so, again, thank you for allowing me to share my story and the details of my story. I know it was a mouthful and it was a long time. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was entertaining. I hope you learned some things about me, but also about the NBA and some of the things, mental health and the medical community and some of the things that I talked about. I hope you take something away from it. But to end, we cannot trust these institutions. Look at how many people will see this tonight. They'll hear this tonight. They'll listen to this. They'll watch this, and they'll go right back to the NBA tonight, turn the TV on, watch the NBA, watch the commercials, watch the advertisers, listen to the narratives coming out of the machine, see a Wojnarowski tweet, go look at it, think that it's credible, think he has integrity, think that he's some great writer with no problem. I mean, this is what we're trying to build here. This is what I mean by the alternative economy. How many people need to come forward with credible information and stories that show you the corruption of the status quo, that show you the corruption of these institutions that preside over you? And make no mistake about it, they preside over you. The NBA is one of them. And you can think that the NBA is a basketball league. You go look at the owners and what other industries they're involved in and what corporate partnerships they have, and you'll realize what I did back then. They're the watering hole for a global corporate community. And where people and make no mistake about it. The most valuable currency in our society today is not money. It's not money. It's not rare metals, precious rare metals. It's not gas and oil. The most valuable currency in our society today is attention. People's attention. Who has what people's attention and what they're able to do or what they're able to create through that attention. Attention is the highest currency in our society, which is why the NBA carries one of the biggest sticks in the entire world. They can tell you what they want to tell you, or in some cases, they can distract you from what they need to distract you from. That's the value of attention. In my story, it was, don't look at mental health and the human psychology. Don't look at don't look at how Silicon Valley is doing dopamine experiments on rats, where the rat, in some cases, would actually choose the dopamine, even if it meant suicide. They set up an experiment for the rat to electrocute itself in order to get dopamine in the experiment, and the rats would choose the dopamine until they electrocuted themselves to death. It's what they've done to all of us. It's what they've done to many of us. That's the matrix we're living in. And they're not hiding it. You go read the white papers on the internet and social media. They're saying right in the white papers, this is how they used it. Listen, understand this. They used this scientific expert model to justify all the liquid investment or the angel investment or the capital investment they needed from the hedge funds and the Wall Streets and the other financial institutions. They used the inhumanity that they would bring down upon you to justify getting the money to build the thing that brought the inhumanity. And I'm the lost and confused one. I'm the martyr. I'm the one who has this noble cause with noble intentions, but it's too soon, too much, not my burden to bear. You need to focus on the NBA, your basketball career, and creating a sustainable platform to talk about these issues. Well, I'm going to end right there. I hope that I don't have to have an NBA career or a professional basketball career to talk about these issues. I'm hoping that creating a podcast like this will be good enough, and we'll start to build an audience and a community to further these conversations. I appreciate you sitting through my story. I thought it was a necessary first step in the podcast, episode 1. Get to know me, the Royce White story, in effect, and how I came to be fighting against this globalist agenda. On Wednesday, we're going to hit the ground rolling at 9 p.m. Central again, talking about globalism. We're going to go away from the local. We're going to go away from Royce and his anecdotal story, and I'm going to take you all the way to the 35,000-foot view of the entire ball game. And we're going to go well beyond the borders of America, well beyond the courts of the NBA, and well beyond this studio to have that discussion. So I thank you. This was episode 1 of Please Call Me Crazy. We appreciate your viewership always, today, in the future. Thank you so much. Again, like and subscribe to this channel if you get the chance. Please go check out Professor Penn, the Professor Penn podcast, and like and subscribe to his channel. freepeopleradio.com. You can see everywhere we're available. Yes, we're on YouTube, but we're also available on Rumble. We're going to be backing every episode up on BitChute because the things that we're going to talk about are very sensitive to the establishment and the powers that be, obviously. You can follow us on all social medias, and all of that information is available on the website. So please go visit freepeopleradio.com for that information as well. I thank you for joining us for this first episode. Here we go. Godspeed.